Hello everybody and welcome to another lesson on soundproofing. My name is Wilson Harwood and I am a soundproofing expert and acoustician based in Nashville, Tennessee. And I'm going to continue on with part 2 of our series on this client can play electric guitar as loud as he wants in his basement studio. And today I'm going to be talking about the door isolation that we're using and probably what you're really interested in learning about, which is the electrical plan and the HVAC mechanical plan. And then we'll talk a little bit about a custom soundproof acoustic soffit that's going to be going around the rim of this studio as well. So if you're interested in all that, definitely stick around. If you haven't already, I highly recommend watching part 1, which will be linked in the bottom of this video. Before we jump in, I do have a free resource for you. This is my free soundproofing workshop. It's 30 minutes of in-depth teaching going over how to build a soundproof studio in your backyard, your garage, or in your basement. So if you haven't already, definitely check that out at soundproofyourstudio.com/workshop. All right, let's dive into this lesson on understanding how to build a basement studio where you can blast electric guitars as loud as you like. All right, let's dive in. All right, so let's start with the doors again today. This is a unique perspective here that shows you how I start all of my doors, which is with this black stuff, which is basically just 1/16 inch rubber. Ideally, we'd use neoprene rubber, but sometimes it's hard to find pure neoprene. I've found this to be a very difficult thing. So I recommend just 1/16 inch rubber. And if you can get the Silomer or neoprene, if it's available, or even a mixture of neoprene and other types of rubber materials will work. This is going to go all the way around our door. So you can see here we have the 2 layers of drywall on our inside wall, the Baccarat and acoustic sealant at the base, same thing on the outside wall, and our rubber goes between them. So this is going to be the edge of your stud wall here, and then the edge of your stud wall there. And actually, let me just see if I can kind of hide that. There you go. That's a perfect example. So you can see behind the rubber now, you can see our stud walls there and our air gap. This is actually bigger than a 1-inch air gap just because of the I-beam above and blah, blah, blah from the last video. But basically that shows you that. So that's the rubber. Let me see if I can get you guys another perspective of that. So I wanted to just kind of zoom out and show you guys the overall door idea here. And this can help you understand sort of what's going on from a high level perspective with this section cut perspective. So you can see here at the top, you can't really see this right here, but there is some rubber, which I can show you in a second. And then we've got the ISOStore HDLF on the outside. So this will come as a whole, not only the door, but also the frame. Then we've got a little piece of foam that goes around in between the gap between this internal door jamb frame, which doesn't have a door in it because we're just doing a single door for this client. But this still needs to be isolated from the exterior wall. So neither wall is touching each other, even though it looks like it's connected. That little bit of foam is covering the gap. Now, the only thing that does truly connect is the rubber. But again, remember, rubber doesn't conduct sound that easily. So it is blocking the airspace here and making it so that we don't get weird smells or anything like that. And it gives a continuous seal across the gap there. So I always do that in my plans, and you can just see trim and stuff like that there. So let's get a more detailed view. Here's a great section that kind of shows what's going on here. So right here, we're going to have some putty pad just stuck in if there's any gaps there between the drywall and our door frame here. We can see that there's the black rubber that's going to go across here. You can barely see it. And then right here, you see that red, that's going to be our putty pad stuffed in above the ISOStore door frame. And then this square right here is a 1-inch foam gasket that I have my clients buy that goes in between the door jamb and the ISOStore door frame. And then we have our ISOStore 2.5-inch thick door, and it comes with its built-in own door stop here, which we diagram right there. And there's actually some seals and stuff that we don't show in that shot there that keep this airtight and closed. At the bottom, the ISOStore door comes with a threshold, which we've diagrammed right here. It's actually kind of moved inside our door, which shouldn't be the case. It should be a little bit farther back, but you get the idea. And then we have our underlayment underneath our floor, and then our flooring, which I usually recommend engineered hardwood or a laminate floor, or even a true hardwood flooring if you want to go that route. And so this will give us, the full seal. And then these doors also come with a drop seal that's not shown here, but they come with it. So when the door closes, another drop seal will come down here. So you're getting a double seal on the bottom, which is also really important for isolation. Here's just a nice section view of our door system, just so you can sort of see how the whole thing looks in a section view. And, in the plans, we would actually draw up all the dimensioning and things like that from this view so that you can see exactly where everything should be when you install it. All right, so this is our electrical plan view, and I want to jump from the door now going into our electrical. So we're doing, all of the electrical in the clouds, which is what I really like to do. So you can see we have 2 downlights in every single cloud. That's where the majority of the lighting is going to be. Then we have some track lighting here. That should be the only penetration through our ceiling is in the track lighting, and then we'll have small penetrations for just individual wires that will come down to each one of these clouds, but they'll be, totally sealed up with acoustic sealant, so that won't be a problem. The other little circles you see here are actually going to be downlights in our acoustic soffit, so those won't truly be in the actual ceiling. They're actually going to be installed in the acoustic soffit itself, and then a Romex wire would just be run through the ceiling or through the wall to connect these guys, and that again will be a small penetration, tiny hole, and sealed up with acoustic sealant so that there's no way air could get in and out of that hole and sound couldn't get in either. All right, so I just wanted to show you guys the electrical plan here, and this looks kind of complex. There's a lot going on here, of course, but we're just telling the electrician, hey, here's our switches that we want to have. These red circles denote where we're going to have isolated ground receptacles. So that's going to be our isolated grounds for audio only electrical. And then the other ones are going to be quote unquote normal light switches. We've got our key over here that shows the electrical symbols and everything like that. So that's just giving the electrician a general idea of how all this is going to be put together. And then, it's important to note which types of electrical we're using and where they're placed. So we're doing surface mounted electrical boxes, which I really like to do in all of my designs. If a client really wants them to be flush mounted, meaning in the wall like a traditional outlet, I'm down to do that. But then we sacrifice some of the isolation because you can only use putty pads and you're putting still a pretty big hole in your beautiful wall. Whereas if we surface mount them like we have right here, then you just put a single wire through, putty pad around it if you want, seal it with acoustic sealant, and all the magic happens on the outside of the wall in the actual surface mounted junction box. So now I wanted to give you guys a little overview of the HVAC plan, because this is probably one of the most complex HVAC plans I've ever done. It was really fun working with a mechanical engineer, and we got to, speak the same language for a little bit, which was kind of interesting, talking about CFM and talking, learning from him, and he was learning from me. So it was a really cool experience. And he helped design the whole system so that it has built-in dehumidification, it has built-in humidification, and it also has a built-in ERV and its own practically dedicated HVAC system just for the basement. So this room plus a couple other rooms. And we worked together to design this. We essentially have 3 baffle boxes here that are coming in, and the green is fresh air supply. So we've divided up that supply air into 3 baffle boxes so that we can, one, have the baffle boxes be smaller because we have less air flow coming in volume wise, and 2, so that we could evenly space that airflow coming in so it distributes evenly across the whole room, since this is a fairly large room here. Then we have 1 return, a very large baffle box, and as you can see, these plenums were sized by the mechanical engineer, but you could do this type of stuff as well if you knew the amount of CFM flow that you wanted to have, and also the feet per minute flow that you are shooting for, which is something that both the mechanical engineer and I were thinking about with these designs. Here's a great perspective that kind of shows what we did here. So this box right here is actually going to be coming in below our soffit, so you can kind of see it there. There's the grill. These are going to be Naylor Industry grills, so we've spec'd these grills specifically because we wanted to make sure that you don't hear any of the air noise coming in. So for high-end spaces like this one, we usually specify a very specific grill for quiet airflow, but I'm not too worried about it. Inside of this up here, which is really cool in this built-in cabinet, is going to be a supply plenum. So the air is going to go through the baffle box, through the wall, and then into this supply plenum where it's going to expand even more and slow down even more and come into the room. And then down here we have the return ducting coming through there into that baffle box. Notice that the return is much larger because we have a much larger amount of air going through just one baffle box. All right, this view is probably one of the best views you can see for how crazy this all is, but we have our baffle box here. So we got the 1-inch duct liner. I'm actually defaulting to just using 1-inch on all of my projects. It's just easier. The mechanical engineer said, 1-inch duct liner is always available in the field, whereas the 2-inch duct liner is harder to get. For you guys at home, you can certainly get 1/2-inch or even 2-inch duct liner from Second Skin Audio here in the United States. But just for ease of use, I'm kind of creating systems for scaling this business and making sure that it works in lots of different scenarios. And I do think that kind of standardizing the 1-inch is not going to be a problem for the acoustics of these boxes. Certainly 2 inches is always going to be a little bit better, but it also restricts airflow. So you always are kind of comparing the pros and benefits. You can see here that the air would go into this box. It kind of goes around this baffle here, then it goes around that baffle on the outside. You can see this cut section here, that's plywood, and then the duct liner on the top and the bottom, and then it goes through what I call our soundproof chimney here. So that keeps the air constantly within a sound isolated box, and then it enters the room. You can see that the chimney has some rubber here, some neoprene rubber on all sides, and that's going to decouple the box from our interior wall. So vibrations and noise in the box will not come in and touch our actual double layers of drywall on the inside of the studio. So this is basically how all of these boxes are. All three of them are very similar. And that's how you build them. They're really, in some ways they're simple, and in other ways they're extremely complex. So a lot of our clients hire me specifically because this type of stuff really throws them off, and I don't blame them. You can see how complex all of this is underneath this I-beam right here. This is another great section perspective of the return air. So the return air is going to come through the shelving here. Again, we've got what I call a chimney, which is just this box essentially of plywood and drywall. There's our little rubber, neoprene rubber, that's really important. It comes through here. We actually are using 2-inch duct liner here for this bigger box, which you can certainly do. The air is going to come up around, and then it's going to go up through into the rest of the return ductwork that's going to go up into the ceiling. So again, I like to put my baffle boxes right up against the interior of the wall. You can see here's our 2x4 wall, then we have the plywood right here, then the 2-inch duct liner, and then 2 layers of 1 layer of drywall and 1 layer of plywood all the way around the outside of the box ensures that the box is a continuation of our wall essentially. So sound can't get into the box easily, and also vice versa, sound can't get out of the box into the rest of the basement as well. So here's a little interesting section of our plan view of our ceiling clouds, and I use this to show exactly where you could mount the clouds to the ceiling. And if you followed the plans perfectly, then everything would line up and you would be able to have full support for these ceiling clouds when you install them in the ceiling. So to install the ceiling clouds, I usually recommend using some chains and some eye hooks and eye screws, and that will allow you the easiest way and the most support for hanging these clouds, which are each about 60 pounds each. So these ones are definitely a little bit on the heavier side with all that plywood and the size of them. Again, so here's a section of the plans. It kind of shows the different mounting points that I've pointed out here for the contractor for how to mount these clouds. And again, just showing exactly where everything is going to be is really helpful before you start building all these acoustic panels and hanging them and all that stuff. And you can even see a sneak preview here of the soffit, which I'm going to go into next. So right here is a plan view of our acoustic soffit. I like to build these in some of our studios where I know we can get that extra low end isolation from getting some of the tangential modes that tend to build up in the upper corners of the room. So the acoustic bass soffit is somewhat simple in design, and again, like all of this, a little complex. Essentially, I'm using 1x4s and 1x3s to build the soffit as light as possible, and then I'm using plywood here to hold in our downlighting. as you can see. And then the gray is actually going to be the acoustic fabric. So let's take a closer look at some of this stuff here. So here's another perspective we've got of the soffit, and you can see we're using 1x2 wood trim to cover up the acoustic fabric that we have. You just install the acoustic fabric using construction staples, and you can also see some of the Knopf 2-inch insulation that I'm using. I really like to use the Knopf Ecos insulation. It's what GIK Acoustics uses. It's what I like to use. And I'm doing 2 layers on the bottom, which you'll see in a second, and then 2 vertical layers, and then an airspace in the back. It works the same way as any acoustic panel in a corner. It's just in our upper corners, and it looks nice, and you can hide lighting in there as well, which is really great. All right, so this is a great section perspective that can show you really how I'm building these things. So we've got the acoustic fabric on the bottom, 1x4 here, 1x4 here, 1x3 on the front, just to give it a little bit more room for the air to pass through. And then we got some cross sections, 1x4s across here, and then there's also some on the bottom you can't see. And that's like the structural building of this. And then you can see that I've put the Knopf Ecos. It sits on top of some 1x2s here, just so there's a little air gap. And then another set of the Knopf Ecos here, Knopf Ecos there, and then we've got our front 2 1x2s as well, holding in the staples, covering them up so you don't see them. And nice big air gap behind here. That's just going to help with our low frequency absorption through the whole process. And then I've got these guys built in to just hold this Ecos from falling backwards once it's installed. So basically I'm just making these nice little slots for the insulation and having it hang from the wall, hanging down. All right, I hope that was super helpful in understanding how we created a home recording studio in a basement for one of our clients so that they could play drums or electric guitars as loud as they want and not hear probably pretty much anything above with all those layers of drywall that we added onto the ceiling. So as you can see, there's a lot that goes into this. And if you're on this journey and you're trying to build your own home recording studio or even a soundproof space in general just to work in or have a quiet space to live in, reach out. I'd love to help you. You know, soundproofing and acoustics are my profession, and that's what I think about day in and day out. So if you want to talk to me one-on-one, live in real person for 30 minutes, sign up for a free Soundproof Clarity call, and I'd be happy to see if we're a good fit working together. You can do that right away by just going to soundproofyourstudio.com, clicking on the I want some construction plans button, and you will be able to book some time on my calendar, and I would love to meet you in person. So if you're not quite ready for that, maybe you're like, okay, Wilson, I just found your channel, or I don't think I want to pay you or anything like that. Don't worry. I'm here to help you guys out. So you can also watch my free soundproofing workshop. It is 30 minutes of in-depth teaching going over everything that you need to know, start to finish, on how to build a soundproof room in a basement, a garage, or your backyard. So to do that, just go to soundproofyourstudio.com/workshop, and you can watch that right away. Again, my name is Wilson Harwood. I am an acoustician and soundproofing expert based in Nashville, Tennessee, and I look forward to teaching you more about soundproofing and room acoustics next week. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you all later.